All right. Well, good morning, Greg. We are, for those listeners listening, we are recording this actually on the morning of April 20th, so 4/20, which has a lot of significance for a lot of folks. But so always that feeling in the background of obviously anniversary of Columbine and a few other major events, and then has gained other cultural significance, which actually I guess we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
But today we want to get into what we talk about is we've said this before on podcasts, and we say it a lot in our different training courses when we're talking about culture, and we say culture is merely context, meaning when I'm trying to understand human behavior, a lot of people really get into, well, what's the culture of, that they're part of, or what does this mean, or what is their motive? And a lot of this builds into it. We don't pay as much attention to that because but it's there for context. And I'll give like a quick example, maybe, let you kind of define it. Is everyone talks about these different cultural differences and you got to learn them, and that's great. But a lot of them are pretty self-evident. Perfect example of when we go to Japan, if you've ever been on a subway train in Tokyo, they have guys who work there that have wear white gloves and they pack everyone into the train to get it super, as full as possible. Well, in the United States, would that work here? No, no one's gonna stand for that, right? In our culture here, we don't like that, but it's very different in Japan, where culturally that's acceptable there to be
Yeah.
packed in that tightly with people. And the reason we stay away from a lot of the culture, because there's a lot of, I'm using air quotes, experts out there that talk about this, different pundits. My favorite example is you remember when George W. Bush visited the troops in Iraq that one time, and he's up there speaking with Nouri al-Maliki, and the one guy they let in there was a local reporter, took his shoe off and threw it at him, and he dodged the shoe and threw another one. But they every go on every news station, and they have their Middle East expert going, well, in that part of the world, that's extremely insulting. And you're like, okay, if at any time someone's standing up speaking at a podium, no matter where you're at in the world, someone takes their shoe off and throws it at you, I'm guessing it's an insult, and they're
It's
not saying, hey, have my pair of shoes. They're not giving it to you as a gift. So we overcomplicate certain things. Those are just quick examples, but since we say culture is context, I want to throw to you, Greg, and kind of define some of these terms, what we mean by culture, because I think we should
uh,
probably start with that.
so this is an episode where bring out your yellow pad, pull over for a minute, make sure that you rehearse it a couple of times. So I'll make that deal with you, Brian. So I'll street it from my point of view, but then I would ask you. Uh, I'll do the culture part, you do the context part. So you're going to be my connective fiber on so what. Make
Okay.
sense? Okay, and the reason is because I'm going to circle the drain one time before we go in. So last night, sleep is overrated in the Williams house because I got Shelly sick and she's been shooting at me. So I've got my body bunker on and I'm hiding right now. She went to work today, but I don't know how long that's going to last. So last night in the middle of the night, Dune was on, the chapter one. Never seen it. Put it on. It was letterboxed, which I like. So I got to see it. Read the old Frank Herbert series. Thought it was great. But there's a part where the House of Atreides are entertaining one of the native Arrakis personnel, and they come up during that meeting, and the very first thing the guy does, without saying a word or anything else, is spits in front of the new commander of Arrakis. And then everybody jumps in, and they're about to take offense to that. And the one guy steps up and goes, hey, thank you for sharing your bodily fluid. And he spits back. That's a thing because it's a dry planet and all this other stuff. And you're supposed to, because they got to, remember, they got to bring the audience in a step at a time because
Yeah.
they assume we're all, sheep or idiots. And everybody goes, wow, that was cool. Look at how they value it. Well, the whole theme of the books would have gotten you there. But that was a great way for celluloid to get you right in a moment. So
Right.
I always categorize culture in a bunch of different ways. And people go, you can't. And I can because it's me. And the way I think about it, the very first culture I always think of, Brian, is in the petri dish. So the things you put into the petri dish to cultivate, to come out, what comes out at the end is a culture. Do you get what I'm saying? So
Right. Right.
that's
Right.
the
Yep.
simplest biological example
Got
of
it.
what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The next thing is people overuse culture in business, and they say, "Oh, the culture, the culture, the culture." Look, there's two types we'll talk about in a minute, but then in addition to the culture of a business, you got the culture of a people, a tribe, a group of people, right? An extended family that hangs together. Then you've got the culture you adopt. because I can adopt a culture. This is a free world. You get what I'm trying to say? I don't have to be in a culture to adopt the. We've seen that happen many times. We've seen people do it for nefarious intent and claim that they have a royal background or a decree of some kind when they don't, right? And we've seen other people just to say, "Hey, I'd like the Mohawk hairstyle." No pun intended there for Native Americans, but it's what you adopt. And then the final one for that, the fifth way to look at it, is that how do people categorize you if
Yeah.
they're saying, oh, they're with this culture? Now, that can be completely misinterpreted. Then I would add just two quick ones, and then we can break it down any way we want. I would add to that five, I would add an A and B that go with each one. So there's an inward, okay, that culture which defines us in those roles. And then there's the outward, that which we choose to project to the rest of the world, or how the rest of the world is reading us. You see? So with something that complicated, because you know what people do? They go, oh, heritage, art, music, that defines a culture. Yeah,
Well, it
on its
can.
surface it can,
No, it
right?
can. It
Yeah,
does. It's not that that's what defines it. It's that can define a description. Putting those things together will define maybe a period of that time frame in art
exactly.
or music or that country or that city
Exactly.
or that neighborhood. And that's the beauty of it. There's a lot of complexity in it, and even to the business one. Yet people do talk about that a lot. I
Yep.
love the definition Clark Deaver gave to us, because if you go back and if anyone's listening to those episodes, but he just said, culture is just the interaction of the players in the game. And I
Yep.
was like, wow, that's a really cool, simple definition of that, is how we interact defines that sort of culture. But there's a lot in there. Like you said, there's the inward versus the outward. There's
Exactly.
every different group that you belong to and how you were raised defines the culture of that situation. And it's dependent too. I mean, it's literally almost the context of which you've used it.
And globally and geographically and at a temporal state at a moment in time. And people keep saying that culture defines, and I use that. And what I meant by mine is that it helps us interpret things. Culture
It's
helps
a
us.
lens. Yeah.
It is. It's a lens and it's a language, right? So
Right.
culture shapes us, but we shape culture. That's why I go back to that biological example in the Petri dish, or Petri dish, however you say it. My neighbor's Rob Petri. I used to like the
So,
Dick Van Dyke Show. I suck at chemistry, but the people that know what I'm talking about know. But when you put those items in there, look. So what was the historical necessity of culture? And I want you to give the definition of context. The idea was that a group of people had to interact with another group of people, and there were probably things that we could learn from them, buy from them, breed with them, form a defensive pact with them. So it was important for growth. And for that suitable growth, we had to understand, so we weren't constantly pissing people off. No, I only wear one shoe. No, that's how my hair always looks. I'm going white belt, Brian, but you get what I'm
yeah.
trying to say. So we have to define that. So context is an additional lens.
Well, you have to define it within that. So perfect example, I guess, you operated in different Middle Eastern countries, and
Right.
then all of a sudden it's like, Thursday night and there's all these people out, but it's mostly men. And it's like, oh, okay, they're all hanging out Thursday night because Friday is their holy day, but it's only the men that do that because culturally it's different. They don't include women in everything, over
Exactly.
there. And then, so what does everyone do though? They all jump to these different unreasonable conclusions sometimes
Exactly.
about that culture because perfect they'll say, okay, well, they don't treat women the same way. It's like, okay, well socially it's a little bit different, but who runs every household you've ever been in? When you go into the Middle
Yep.
East, like it's usually the wife or the grandma, who's ever there is kind of overall in charge in that situation. And no matter where you're at, and then when especially like Saudi Arabia, okay, you see the same thing, but then more women have secondary degrees in that country than men do. So technically the women at a higher level are more educated than the men in terms of a formal education. But it can become, we can throw things in the wrong bucket or come to an unreasonable conclusion based on that. And it's just really just to define the moment or the context that you're in, to go, oh, okay, I see why this is different than what I'm used to.
Exactly.
But I
So
can't
we
always
can't
go past that, right?
we can't go past that, because Brian, if you look back to Mesopotamia, look back to early Egypt, women have been venerated in every historical perspective.
That
Look at the Bible or the
look at
Quran or
every
the Torah.
war or song or anything that's ever been
Exactly.
written. It's
So
about love.
then let's take a look at Italy. And if you go to an Italian household, who's going to tell you to take your shoes off and smack you in the back of the head and
Yeah.
tell you to go help with the dishes, right? And but that's not just Italy, because that happens in Germany. And Shelley's family has a Polish background. I saw that in Hamtramck in Detroit all the time. My brother Jeff is still at the beck and call of Marcy, and their mom. So listen, what we have to do sometimes is go back to Preb's comment a long time ago, that we dwell on the similarities rather than the differences, and I think that really helps define what you and I do in human behavior as well.
Well, and here's the other thing about culture. Like I can kind of now, especially with social media, I can belong to whatever group I want. Whether or not
That's
I
the point.
actually
Exactly.
belong to that group. So every every area or every place I've lived, every situation I've been in has a different culture to it. So like I grew up in Chicago. Well, Chicago has its own culture as a city, as a whole city. But I grew up in an Irish Catholic neighborhood on the South Side. That has it has a very unique in its own culture. And then, well, that also makes me, I'm a White Sox fan, which that culture is different than the Cubs fans, are completely
Exactly.
different. Then I was in the Marine Corps, that has its own culture. Then I mean, so you can be, and then now I'm on social media. So guess what? I get to belong to whatever group I want, and I get to be a part of that culture, right? And subculture that goes on in there. And so
But
although
there's
it's interesting, it's novel, but to me it's all the same, right? Meaning there's cultures, there's subcultures. I get to be part of one and part of the other, and I get to identify with another one, even though they've never met me, don't know me over there. I feel related to it, so I identify with that. And so the point of it is, if I'm trying to make decisions off of that, it's not very good, right? It's not a very good way to arrive at a reasonable conclusion about something.
exactly. So you know why, and you just illustrated 9 different ways why. But let me add the idea that 50 years ago we would call you a Renaissance man. It was
Right.
okay to say man and woman and differentiations then too, but now we would accuse you of cultural appropriation.
Right.
And in the same breath that I would come out using cultural appropriation, somebody would come off the top rope and say, yeah, but DEI, we want to include everybody. Inclusion is important, and
Well,
equitable treatment of people. Listen, those all exist. They've
they've
always
been around a
existed.
long time.
There's an ass that didn't believe it and enslaved somebody. There's a group of people that didn't believe it and interred the Japanese during World War II
Right.
because they thought they were a threat. But there was also Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge and
Yeah.
other groups that killed millions. So stop for a minute and take a look at the big picture. What we do, Brian, is we're looking at culture through a straw many times
Hmm.
when we need to throw that straw away and actually open our eyes. But what does that do? That reveals some of our own faults and weaknesses, and that's what people are afraid of.
And because most people can't be defined by one, even if they try to be,
Right.
you're not defined by one single culture. I mean, I mean, unless you're just that, those the very devout Buddhist monks that never leave the temple, that are only
Right.
there, like that's the one and only thing they
Maslow,
do. Yeah.
down and in, right?
I know.
There was one
All right,
tribe in the cave.
that was a
They only
stretch.
listen to.
All right, that was that was that was
I'm
a stretch
sorry.
on your normal Maslow bashing. I don't know how you went from Buddhist monk
Because
to
it's a closed system. But you're
I
specifically right
I,
on. You're right back to the petri
I,
dish.
I get I loosely get what you're saying
Oh
there.
God,
But
it's a cold Mets.
yeah, exactly. No, but so we can be any one of those things, and so
And you can be all of them. That's your point. And I want to
yeah,
make sure
yeah, yeah,
people are
yeah. That
listening
that
to
is my
that.
point. Yeah,
Is you can be any of them, you can be none of them, and still be a part of them. Okay. You can say that I'm a part of this community. Like, for example, if you live in a tenement because that's all you can afford, and you happen to be in one of those places that people say, hey, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, they designed this as low income because they knew that they were going to put the freeway right next door and it was going to be an airport. People still live there. Even though we know that, people choose to live there because it's the only place that they can live. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a culture, because inside of their house and the music in their car or in their earbuds when they're listening on the bus on the way to work, That's what defines us. Each of us is so different because we're so multifaceted. And anybody that's going to be guilty of cultural appropriation or racism or some other argument word, that people bring up now is because of your view. You can't define me with your view.
Right.
I have to define me with what I think I am, right?
And yeah, exactly. And so and the reason why we're taking our time to discuss this and talk about it is because we can use it as a context, but everything we focus on are of course demonstrations of intent.
Precisely.
And whether you're trying to do some sort of threat prediction or whatever you're trying to do, or whether it's a threat or opportunity, I can look it to make that signal more pure. We focus on certain elements that are going to be there regardless of what culture you are part of or claim to
Yep.
be a part of, or any of those things that may, like you said, add context to the situation of why I'm seeing something, but it doesn't always help me determine it almost. I can't rely on that alone to determine what someone's likely intent is. And we talked about it, and I brought it up because we were involved in a project where part of this started to come into account, which is why we ended up saying this isn't going to
Not
go
for us.
anywhere. And I like what you wrote as when we had to do the after action review and what we put it together. And I think I can read part of that without getting into anything on the podcast. But you said, yeah, the Arcadia Cognerati human behavior principles rely on human behavior characteristics which demonstrate intent. Culture can create idiosyncratic displays, rites, and rituals that have no or nominal bearing on threat prediction and hostile intent determination. We
Yep.
feel that culture only matters as context, providing increased granularity with which to support one's evidence-based conclusions.
Yes.
Measuring culture is laboriously slow, especially when the decisions to use deadly force are generally measured in nanoseconds to seconds. So that was
Whoever wrote
this.
that knows what the F they're talking about, my dear friend.
I know. Next time I got to just tell you I wrote this because
Because
once
I
enough
won't
time, yeah,
remember.
I know you won't
I won't
remember.
remember.
So
Exactly.
so
No,
but
you know
but
why
but
we wrote that?
yeah.
Because it was such a philosophical underpinning of the new team that was coming in that they were like, but yeah, should somebody be watched and can somebody be defined and can we and you know what? You're watching all the time. You're human, so you're judging all the time. And all of us judge other humans all the time. That's why we make communication errors, Brian. That's because when another person's talking, instead of looking at them and listening, we're looking at them and saying, God, I hope they stop so I can interject my viewpoint. And that's what I'm going back to there is that, listen, just because you're an Arab American doesn't mean that you are hell
Any more
bent on
likely?
destroying a
Yes. Yeah.
mosque
Yeah.
or more likely to get an AK and take a shot at a U.S. Marine. I mean, the whole Lebanon thing, we could go all the way through history. So why do people keep bringing those up? Because they're convenient. It's an
Well,
easy thing,
it's
you
just
know?
it's a simple heuristic.
Exactly.
It's a a stereotype that we think what the problem I have with this is that ends up screwing up our analysis of situations. Because why? Because we weigh things that don't need to be weighed. We give value to things that there are no value to. And it
Exactly.
and that what it does is it makes it easier for bad guys to operate, is what it does.
Yep.
And when you
Yep.
lump everyone together like this, it just makes it easier for people who want to do harm to operate in that environment, because you're
Of
not
course.
seeing clearly. And if you're not seeing clearly, you're definitely not going to see them. So that kind of, because it ties into as well, um, when the saying, and we had one of our listeners wrote in about, which is why I'm bringing it up, is that the perception is reality, which is
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
they brought up a good point too, which is true. I get what I mean when people say that. It's what you perceive is what you're going to think, and that was a big thing. And this example of our listener wrote up like, oh, it was like in a boot camp. I had a drill instructor tell me that perception is reality, and what they're trying to get across is you have to look and act professional. You have to get a haircut. You have to press your uniform, all this stuff. Why?
Yep.
Because when someone sees you, they go, oh, okay, you're squared away, you're professional, and they start thinking that about you, which it can technically be true, but it doesn't mean you're any good at your job. It just means you look good in the moment, right? And so it's funny, we all know those people that, like, they look like crap. They, always seem to be like a slob, but like they're the best people at whatever it is that they do. They're really,
Yes.
really good at. And we judge them on these indicators that don't always make sense if we don't put them into context, right?
And
They
there we're right back to context, Brian. So everybody listening to this podcast understands what Sunday clothes mean.
Yeah.
Everybody understands that when I grew up for 11 years straight, every Saturday morning, we went down to the garage and we sat on wooden boxes and we shined the one pair of shoes that we needed for Sunday morning. And they were the oldest, crappiest shoes, but you had to be able to see yourself in them. That's why the boot camp didn't bother me, because it was back when they, still had to have the high gloss shine on your Cochran's boots and stuff. And the idea was that, hey, I've been doing this my whole life. Now, anytime that we asked what the reason was for, we got the shit knocked out of us. Nobody explained to us that this is how we define ourselves when we go into other social members of our group. In that setting, Sunday is more important than Monday or Saturday, right? And
Yeah.
so those little differentiations are distinctions with a different and become a heritage to that group. And that's wonderful to hang on to. Why? Because it offers me security.
Yeah.
There may be no economic benefit to it, but the bigger picture is that it does benefit you, because people make knee-jerk reactions. And if you come up smelling of alcohol, or you come up and you're more well-dressed with your hat in your hand and shiny shoes, you're going to project an image. And the idea is that the brain is constantly looking for a danger. So as you're coming up, danger is the first thing on your primitive mind going. I hear this lizard brain and these analogies all the time, and it's like, stop quoting what you read and start
Yeah.
understanding the shit that you've studied. The
Yeah.
idea is that your sensing mechanism and your amygdala is constantly trying to make order out of chaos around you. So here's a new player. They come up, they're kind of dressed like you, they kind of look like you, things are kind of normal in that environment. So what are we doing? We're sense making. Is the person's hands visible? Are they waist aware? Does the person have a bulge under their coat? All those other things. So one of the cool things about culture, Brian, is it forms a society within a society where we can make judgments, value judgments, based on historical perspective. These people have always come into the village, kicked our asses, and stolen our women.
Yeah.
These people, however, have always come in and traded tangelos for our butter. So those things are what our brain has accepted over the 175,000 years. But guess what? It hasn't done. It hasn't taken danger warning, Will Robinson, off the plate. So your culture is a way that you project your image around, and the perception of reality is what the other person sees. Now, if they draw their conclusion early, even if it's wrong, do you know how long it's going to take to break
To
that?
break it. Yep.
That's what they need to
And
understand.
the longer that continues to hold true in my brain, my perception of you,
Yep.
the harder it is for me to break that. I mean,
And confirmation bias jumps
yeah,
in, and
yeah.
you say something or you
I
turn a
will,
certain way,
I will
and I go,
only.
there you go.
There it
There,
is.
it falls right into the bucket.
And what everyone wants is going, well, how do you change that? What can you do about it? And there's, I thankfully a lot of that stuff is going away. Different. Well, we're gonna teach you how to not have different biases, which is absolutely impossible. You can't.
Well,
That is.
I love the one,
Well,
Brian. I'm
I
going to
mean,
teach
maybe.
you how not to have a bias you don't even know you have.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
there we
yeah.
go.
I mean, maybe if we work at it for the next few 100,000 years, I mean, maybe
Yes,
we could,
totally
then it'll
agree.
happen. By then, maybe a 500,000 years from now, we could get rid of that.
Yep.
But the idea is it's always there. So there's recognition of it going, okay, am I falling into this cognitive trap that humans were designed to fall into
Yep.
is a good way to look at it. But knowing how to do this. And the other way too is what we're talking about is sense making and problem solving, right? And
At
looking
its core.
and
Yes.
looking for those similarities, not the differences. Because if I'm looking for similarities and I'm not finding any, well, then this is truly different and novel, right? and
Yep.
and and so if otherwise, if because if I focus on the similarities, right, it allows me to simulate that situation much faster. I learn it and go, oh, okay, I see why this person's behaving this way. It's because they don't understand what I'm saying, because they don't speak my language, right? And they're confused, not because they have any ill intent behind their behavior, or
Yep.
whatever the situation is. And so by doing that, I have to understand that this is how all of us see the world at all times. And what can happen is I can get really good at maybe defeating this in a certain area, but that doesn't mean I'm good at it everywhere else, right? So maybe I'm
Precisely.
good at it, Greg, like from a security standpoint, you can drop me in with a team or security team or whatever. I can go, well, I'll spin you up real quick. Go, okay, well, this is what that means. This is what it is, and see how they're doing this. And they go, oh, wow, yeah, I've seen that before. Got it. Right. Just like we do during training. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be just that good when I walk into the house dealing with
No,
my own family and
no,
getting
it
into
takes
argument.
time.
So I conceptualizing that across multiple domains is the hard part, right?
You're exactly right. So
But it's the same process.
you don't have onboard oxytocin in your mouth that when you go by a person, you can blow it on them and make them like you more.
Yeah.
Okay. We
Well,
don't have
that's
those
called
tools.
Rohypnol, I think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Roofies. So no, but because we don't have that, we can use first impressions and culture to help us better understand and communicate with somebody else. So art can help us communicate with somebody.
Oh
A
yeah,
poem
that's a language.
can help us communicate with somebody. Music. But what you can't do is, I'll give you two perfect examples. So, Osen, I know from paying attention to you that you listen to Trent Reznor, Nine Inch Nails, and you turn it up and you love it on headphones and you love it on vinyl. Okay. Now I'm starting to create a characterization, atypical things about Brian that I can draw a reasonable conclusion on. Well, no, Brian likes music. Okay. Now, if you start acting out or manifesting or dressing in a certain way, those are things. Now, what if somebody uses that as an extreme message and puts it on the bottom of their message when they bomb a church or a mosque or do a drive-by? Okay, do you see how many different spirals that we've got there? So
Right.
which one of those can I use? Well, I can use that to define the attacker because that extremist uses this message each time that they go into this environment. So now that becomes a gating mechanism for me to help profile or define that person. You see, so I can use it to gain information, but I cannot use it to classify you. I cannot use that music and go, well, because that's heavy metal music, that's why he went to extremism. You
No,
see what I'm trying to say?
right.
It's all intent
You do the opposite. You say, oh, it's the music that did this. It's like, no.
because
That
that's
person,
the easy answer.
right?
And it's wrong
Now
all the time.
in that individual, maybe that music is helping fuel whatever it is that they're going to do, almost in a sense, right? I'm getting
exactly.
it's part of who I am
But
and
that's
my
a
culture
you
I've
thing.
created. But I've
That's a you
created it.
thing.
That's the whole thing.
Exactly.
I created it. I
Yes,
chose
sir.
it. This wasn't thrust on me. I went to it, right? So I can't do this weird justification where we say, well, it's the music's fault, it's TikTok's fault, it's
Yep.
Twitter's fault. No, it's the human interaction with it. That's the
You're
problem.
exactly right.
And we do that because it's a low calorie, simple way to identify a problem, point a finger at it, and say, now I can come up with a solution. Because Greg, I can fight against that music and say we shouldn't have that in here because that
And burn
will
it
cause
and
this.
yeah,
And
vilify it. You're exactly right. And listen, you know what that shows? That shows a low level of intellect and acumen when it comes to reading fellow humans. Because I'm so afraid that I'll take things that typify or classify you. And the next thing, well, do you remember the art? And I don't remember the name of the art style, Brian. It's happened everywhere in the world for every war, Peloponnesian, everything. But in World War II, because that's more of the era that we're more familiar with, where the Americans created the Nazi look on the posters, and the Nazi
yeah,
were these evil
yeah,
spiritual demons. Same thing with the Japanese. Well, then you understand Teufelhund, okay, was devil dog. That's how the Germans viewed the Marines. And
yeah.
so they had the same thing. So what we're saying at the 30,000 foot level is both of those cultures were identical in how to process and create evil in another culture, right? So even though our underpinnings were completely different and National Socialism is different than democracy, we use the same methods. Why? Because
Yeah.
at the core, we're all humans. We
Yes.
all have the same wants and needs. And so you decide to go off the reservation. We didn't decide that for you.
And we all have to justify our actions in some way and
Of
justify
course.
our the way we understand things and justify our opinions. So we do that in the same manner. Now, you
Yep.
might use a different drawing, but it's the same thing. I mean,
Easily.
you might complain about or have a different solution to, but it's really not that different on how we do that because that's just a psychological and sociological need, right? And you brought it
So
up right. Well, you brought it up right there too. Fear.
so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how completely unrelated things can coalesce to make me afraid. Three random happenings all over the country come together.
Just this
I'll
past
talk
week.
about
Yeah.
the white guy that's at his house, and I'm saying white guy just so I can remember the incident, not that it's a descriptor in any other way. The white guy that's up at the end of his house and says people have been dragging up and down the street and driving up
Yeah.
and down the street, and he's on a remote area on a dirt road, and now he's getting more and more anxious and afraid, and all of a sudden a white female pulls up in a
With their
vehicle with three
friends.
other
Yeah.
people in it,
Yeah.
and he steps out shooting and ends up killing her. Now, again, just for context, I'm throwing in the color of the two participants there to show that it is clear that you couldn't have a racist underpinning to that argument. Now, somebody could make one, but you
Yeah.
would have to interject that. What this is fear, a fear of a human that's
Yep.
been fed information that he now starts to put the round peg in the square hole and go, they're coming to
This
get
is
me.
it.
Here they
This is
come.
what they're
And
talking about.
they've
This is
been
what I've
ramping it
seen.
up, and it's an armed home invasion, and I already have a gun,
Yep.
so I don't have to
I
put a
gotta
lot
use
of
it.
brain work there.
Yeah.
Okay. So Brian, that issue had nothing to do with the other one with the old man shooting the kid that went to the wrong house,
Yeah.
or the guy shooting the people that jumped in the wrong car
Yep.
at the store.
Young
right?
girl. Yeah.
But Brian, what happened is we put them together. You know what?
Yes.
We put them together because the lights in the sky scared me, because the bubbles under the water
A lot
scared
of
me.
stars up
And
there.
I have to put something together. And so that must be the archer trying to tell me how to live my life. And that must be the lion trying to tell me that tomorrow is going to be a better day. Our fear drives our hatred. And we have to break that cycle. And again, this is no easy task. And Brian, you made a great point of it. It's going to take us 100,000 years to evolve past this. And it's taken us 100,000 years to get to this point.
To get to this point where we don't immediately club everyone that comes in, over the mountain pass, because, that they could be killing us. But fear is where a lot of this, where a lot of it comes from, where this sort of ends justification comes from, where these poor decisions are made at,
of course,
where this kind of subjective reality is created. When if I, in a completely sterile, comfortable environment, you ask me some questions and get me to draw a conclusion, it's likely going to be reasonable. The second I put some sort of fear over you, that you will rationalize everything, right? You have to, because once this survival mechanism is triggered in your brain, there's no going back. You can't unring it. You can't wind that back and say, well, had we known this. You can't do that in the moment. So the point is to not get to the level where you're making decisions out of fear, because fear-based decisions are never good, or they're only going to revolve around your personal survival or the survival of your group, right? But the idea that's the only options your brain will give you. And when I become over, and this is where the term like self-radicalization comes from. Kind of that's what you're doing. You're going, oh my God, and here's another video. And
that's what the guy did when he heard those cars outside
for years. He was doing that, building up to that, right? And then going, it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen.
And this one came closer than the last 2,000 times.
So this
he had a strike.
And I'm done. I got to draw a line in the sand.
So that goes directly to what you were talking about. Is my perception becoming a reality? Because what happened is I perceived it so many times in my mind that I allowed the situation to come together, and the Rubik's Cube wasn't orange and blue and green, on either side. It still had a couple missing pieces, but it was cognitively close enough for my fear to take over and give me a jump to an unreasonable conclusion. And Brian, this goes back to our taser argument. Okay, if you don't want people shooting people with the taser, stop making it look like a gun and putting it on your gun belt. Those two things are so overwhelming to the human brain that when the house is on fire, you can't tell the difference. And people go, well, training. Well, if Gladwell's lie was 10,000 hours would change it, how many people with that taser and that pistol have practiced which one's which, left hand, right hand, under stress, not under stress? Brian, it's ridiculous. You throw that into the mix. You throw a loaded gun into a drawer in a house, and a kid's going to find it, and a kid's going to shoot. I give enough monkeys a typewriter, and we've got Paradise Lost.
Yeah, exactly.
And I totally agree.
And so there's we categorize these things in a way to get people to understand it and cut through the noise to go, well, what do I need to do this? I can make these shootings about whatever I want it to make. I
Yep.
can make it about, men killing women. I can make it about race. I can make it about guns. I can make it about, whatever I want, but it's fear. I mean, so if you stick under the broad category of fear, it goes, how did these people involved in this situation get to the level where they were so scared that they felt that their life was threatened? And you're
Yes.
going, what would that take? And am I on that path or is someone I know on that path? Or I mean, because you see a lot of these kind of cliche quotes that used to come out that people would say, and like if you really live by such a simple quote or a simple binary way of looking at things, I don't think you're fully understanding the world in general, not just
And you
these
must have a
situations.
miserable life.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what
Oh
I'm
God,
saying?
I couldn't imagine. Yeah, I mean, just
What a tabula rasa every day.
everything is a 0 or 1. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, well,
Yeah.
good, have fun with that. That sounds horribly. Well, it sounds boring, honestly. But getting out of that kind of fear-based decisions
Yes.
is when things are hanging over you, you will go down a path and not even realize you're on it. And I think a lot of these situations are those popping up now, right? Because we
Yes.
said it before. We talked about it even during COVID and after everything, coming out of a long war. Like people don't realize, like, yeah, but that's just like in the ether. It's just these conversations, like that's going on in the back of your mind. So if you have all of these things stacking up, and you know what, eggs are expensive, and now
Yep.
that you just eat,
Yep.
you eat all that up without ever grounding yourself in reality, saying, wait a minute. How is my life affected by everything I'm seeing right now?
Precisely. So go to that, Brian, go directly to that second shooting we were talking about, where the old mid 80s guy
Yeah,
shoots a
shoots
young
a
kid
kid.
that was going to
Yeah,
pick up his sisters
yeah,
at a
at the
house.
wrong
So
house. Yeah.
so add these factors before you make a value judgment. Not you, I'm talking to everybody. Culture produces stability. Okay? Culture produces safety
Hmm.
and security for a tribe of individuals that see themselves together. So a community should develop that culture. But here you had no Gladwellian talk, an outlier. This was an older guy. He'd been disenfranchised from his family. COVID really hit everything hard. He was more and more a recluse and secluded. He had all of these life views that were made in a bubble
Yep.
at a grasp over time for 80 some years, right? And now he doesn't have a family to rely on. He doesn't have the emotional response that you and I do because he doesn't get out in public and socialize, and his tribe hasn't taken care of him. So for every time you say that he's on his own, that's partly your fault too if you're in that
Yep.
community, and
Yep.
nobody wants to say this
No,
part,
yeah, no
right?
one wants to say,
So
well, I tried
so
reaching out to him. No, you didn't.
he sees a guy on a porch
Yeah.
and he hears the person shuffling around, and Brian, it's
He goes,
inevitable.
this is it.
This
This
is
is
the one.
everything.
He's
The
coming
this
in.
is his fear
I've
coming to
watched the news,
realization. I've
and
seen
here
this
you
play
come.
out. Yep.
So
It's
that's where
there's
we have to start.
so
We
he
we can
and
fix that.
well,
We
he
can't
created that.
fix. Yeah.
He created it, reinforced it, society reinforced it, everything in
Yes.
his life reinforced this inevitable pathway
Yes.
of
And
what
nobody
was
said
likely
wait.
going to happen. And he
Yep.
never saw, his brain never couldn't at that point, at that age, after hearing all this and thinking this for so long, it couldn't create another explanatory storyline where, hey, you know what? Maybe it's the kid lost in the neighborhood. Maybe
Exactly.
it's someone looking for someone. Maybe it's someone asking for help, or maybe never that. It was always,
Because
always, always doom and
fear
gloom.
is
Yeah,
myopic, and fear
it is.
is like we talk, Brian. Our buddy Grossman, who's an expert on school shootings now too. But we talk about his first book with reverence because all of us know that he
Yeah,
was on the right track.
his
And what he
research
was
was
trying to
great.
do, yeah, and his research was great, and also his corollaries were great.
Yeah,
So you can't function if you have tunnel vision, but tunnel vision is how you function. He missed that one critical step.
right.
That tunnel vision is how you're supposed to function in an emergency because your brain slows time down so you can see those factors that weigh more heavily in your survival, right? So that's a simple thing. We could do that soundbite right now on LinkedIn and people would buy our upcoming novel, right? But the idea is what we do is we oversimplify that and we say fear is a powerful thing. Fear changes your DNA. Fear changes how you breathe, how your heart pumps, how your capillaries
Hmm.
interact, how the chemicals in your brain structure. And this guy that turned himself in with his gun said to everybody, I was scared to death. That's what we can fix. We can fix that as a culture. We can fix that perception of reality. You know what we can't fix? We can't fix if we keep dumping it in and going, it's just racism. the country's still
Yeah,
racist. This is still a lynch mob mentality. Because what we do is we painted ourselves into a gosh damn corner, and now no further psychological, sociological talk can take place because it's all already with a chip on the shoulder, Brian.
Well, if we keep looking for simple answers, then we're going to keep getting simple solutions, and we're going to keep
and if we keep looking for a fight, Brian, we're gonna find a fight. That's it. You got it.
And that's you know, I don't know, man. Some of these are just people wanting to do that, right? They literally just I want to pick a fight, or I want to go out there, or I want to be a hero,
for example,
or I'm going to be.
You and I don't know enough about the cheerleader one yet,
right?
Because there's still information that's coming in, and the information was really odd. They always park here. This is the carpool lot. She just made a mistake and went to the wrong car, and then the person left that car and came over and shot him. That's interesting to me. And why would it be pushed in with these others?
Well, because it's easy for us to do that, right? And it got thrown in there.
Got it.
Same thing. And there's likely more to that story.
Even though these stories are separate and distinct, they'll always be lumped together for time and memoriam, and they're wrong.
Yeah,
you know.
No, that's a great point, and how we do that. Like, we lump things together that don't seemingly belong together to show a bigger point, but you also have to be careful. You're talking about case by case basis on how you look at things, and not fall into these traps. But I mean, I like what you said when you said fear is myopic. It's a good way to look at it, and I think a lot of people don't realize. There's a lot of folks walking around out there right now, people listening to this podcast, statistically speaking. There's people listening to this podcast who are operating in this mode where there's a level of fear and anxiety there. And now fear and anxiety are different, right? Fear is now in the moment. Anxiety is anticipation, kind of fear-based, but like protracted. So later on. So, but your anxiety can turn to fear very quickly. And so when presented with something that you have been anxious about, suddenly you might get scared. And so a lot of people are operating at that level. And if we're not careful, every one of those interactions could go catastrophically wrong just from misunderstanding and just being scared. I mean, that's literally what it is being scared. And I don't think we handle things well, because, you look at what does every generation say about the previous or about the next generation? Oh, you bunch of pussies. You have it so easy. Back in my day, that every single generation. So if you've said that right now, sorry to tell you, but your parents said that about you, and their parents said that about them.
The Greeks were saying it. The Romans were saying it. Exactly.
Plato wrote about that. Like, we are doomed.
Plato wrote that you stoic bastards don't understand life. Right?
Yeah, like,
it's so cool.
No, exactly. And so that's the point. But then what do we do? We continue to try and nerf the world. Well, let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. You can't say that on social media. Maybe you need to be a certain age. It's like, all right. So you're saying every generation is getting softer, all right? But you're also then going to contribute to that by not developing them. You're going to nerf the world. You're not going to build resilience in the next generation. You're going to say, I'm going to go out there and nerf the world. I'm going to prohibit you from doing any of these things. I'm not going to allow this. Or I can do that. I can spend my whole life trying to accomplish that. Or I can turn and go with the insurgent and go, all right, man, you're going to be faced with some challenging situations in life. This is how you get better at facing them. This is how you
understand. And there's nothing in life that guarantees it's going to be fair, Brian. And you tell her that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So don't think that somebody's going to give you a free lunch. It's always going to have a club behind it. I love that about you, is that you're not only pragmatic, but you're practical.
That's every time she brings up, well, that's not fair. I go, you're absolutely right. You and I play by a different set of rules in this house. That's just how it is.
And that's going to change. That's going to change over time, right?
I go, if you want to change some of those rules, here's the things you can work on. When you get older, that's going to change. But under these circumstances, we play by a different set of rules.
And you can choose to protest.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're going to find your ass in the yard.
Or there's the right way to do it. There's the wrong way to do it. I love, because McKaylee does that. Okay, you want to do that? Write out a plan on how we're going to accomplish that. Tell me how you want to do that. What are the steps involved? And I'm like, oh, that's good.
Critical thinking, man. That's promoting critical thinking right there. Hail to McKaylee.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is like we have this counterintuitive view of how to solve these problems. The
violence. Okay, so just like fear can spill into rage. Because when I'm afraid, I can lash out. And even if I lash out at the shadow on my porch, it's rage nonetheless.
It's something for me.
it came from fear. Somebody lit the match too close to my fear, and it jumped. Now that chasm has become that momentary rage where I feel that I have to scream and defend myself and fire my gun,
Yeah.
and then I recede back
It,
into the house, and I don't want to give myself up for an hour because I'm not sure what just fucking happened.
well,
And that's because you're a human,
and
right?
these different cultural wars play
Yeah,
on that, right? Because
of
it's
course
like,
they
well,
do.
I don't know how to articulate what I'm upset about, so I'm going to get mad at that thing right there because
Yep,
I don't like it. My group doesn't, because which I all of these these cultural wars that go on, I think they're so fucking boring, and I
right,
think they're so stupid, and I think a lot of it is there's people that have contempt for other people, which is fine. You can have that. You could still live in a society with someone you have contempt for. That's okay, right?
right.
I think there's people that don't know how to articulate what it is that they're upset about, and they're angry about something, and they don't know how to describe it. So they just lash out at whatever thing is in the news and they can get upset about because it's
Yes,
easier that way. I can just psychologically project all of my different problems
right.
on this, and everyone does that. Every human does that. It's not a what side of the political spectrum we're on. They all do it, and I hate it because it just, one, it obfuscates everything. We don't know, we can't clearly see what the problem is.
Yep.
We're never going to get the
Dissonance, baby.
solution.
Turbidity, baby.
Yeah,
That's where it comes from.
and then people profit off of that. I
Yeah,
mean, whether that's
yeah.
a company or a politician, to get, they're going to profit off of that, and that's the problem that I
So
can't
what are you
stand.
saying? You know what you're saying? You're saying that the company that just started advertising that they're going to have a safe room that you can press a button and it's going to pop up in a school to save your kid.
Oh
They're
God.
going to say that can reduce your anxiety. And I would agree. But
It'll
then when
reduce
the
your
school
anxiety.
resource officer is nailing your daughter in that place because it shows them a place that they can hide or the kids are using fentanyl in it, don't come
Exactly.
back to me and say, this was a bad idea. We have to think longer. Brian, your and I, my business plan, when we have to go to Shelley and Martin or talk to any of our stakeholders, it's a century. It's not 15 minutes. It's not next month.
Yeah,
It's where do
it's
we want to be over the
here.
next decade, right? And where do we want us to be able to be in the market in a century? Because if we're not talking about
Well,
that,
it's just
then
like,
all we're doing is going
it,
along with everything else. We're holding
I
our
just
breath,
got off the
Bill.
call with, we're not going to mention this morning, but same thing.
No,
It's like,
no,
this is how you build that legacy program. This is how you
exactly.
make it yours, so that
And bigger than all of us.
when budget cuts happen in 4 years and you can't pay me to come help you with this, it still exists and it's
Oh,
still going. It's
you
still in your
mean that
DNA.
cool Vince Vaughn movie with Google where everybody is having fun and it's the greatest environment in the world, and now all of a sudden they're
Yeah.
laying off people by the thousands and
Hmm.
shit's changed, right?
Hmm.
And so when somebody says, well, that yeah, is inevitable, yeah, it was inevitable, but nobody told you that when you came in the first day, and that's what
Yeah.
people have to understand. I don't care that you have a PhD; you could be out on your ass tomorrow. You have to understand that turbidity is fomented by stuff like two-party system in democracy,
Right.
by rising or falling oil prices. And what
Yeah.
happens is because we think that there's an app to fix all that shit and it's going to be fast, that we don't look at the long-term ramifications, and that anxiety builds up, and that's why I shoot somebody that comes to my porch.
Because
That's that simple.
those things that are outside of my control give me anxiety, Greg. Like,
Yes.
I can't control what the price of a gallon of gas is going to be at the pump,
Yep.
but it hits me
But
hard.
I can
So,
control drinking at a bar tonight and wallowing in self-pity. I can
and I
cut
can control
myself, Brian.
I can control who I direct my anger towards.
Oh, you're exactly right. You
And
know?
whether that's outward, whether that's inward, like yourself. Well, I can control this pain. That's what,
Yep.
like you just said, if I can go cut myself and I can control how
Yep.
much pain I feel, well, man, that's what you're using it for. And all of that stuff
Exactly.
that happens out there, it's we often we it often affects us less. It often affects our daily life less than we really think, but we have
We
to blame
make it
something. Yeah.
right. We make it affect our daily life, and we insinuate ourselves into the situation because we have to have drama. We can't just have all
Yes.
comedy. We
No.
have to have drama.
There.
We have
Yeah.
to belong to this set and understand that that set of people rely on me for something. And even if that something is always being Eeyore, it'll never work. We're all going to
Yeah.
die. They have to rely on me because that's how I feel stable in that environment.
No,
That's
and
what it
that's
is.
how it goes from the psychological to the sociological needs that every human being in every society needs, and that we need as humans. Is,
Exactly.
well, if you're upset about this, Greg, I should probably be upset about it too. And you
Right.
know what? Yeah, that's right. That is messed up. And you know what? Maybe we should think this way. And now it spirals wildly out of control. And control is so important you know,
You're
for
exactly right.
humans, and we have to have some control. We have to find that in some way. And like you just said, I can't, the comedy doesn't work unless you have a drama, because everything's a comparative
Precisely.
baseline
There
that
can't be a hell unless you understand a
in
heaven.
heaven. Yeah.
There has to be those polar
The,
opposites, Brian.
so you need that, right? You can't have a California if you don't have a Florida, right? We need both of
Yep.
those actually. You know what I mean? I
You're
I
exactly right.
I I
Well, look at the
need
rat issue that we
oh,
had. Okay,
yeah.
so
Perfect
one
example.
coast is
Perf-
the rat star, the other is
Oh
oh my
my
god, we can't
God.
use the
So what
sticky
was that
traps.
from
So
was it somewhere in LA, West Hollywood or
yeah,
something like that? The
yeah.
local city said we're no longer using glue rat traps. That's inhumane to clutch these rats. We can't treat animals like that. And then you
And
literally
on the
the
same
same
page,
the same week it was go to the East Coast in New
yep.
York City. They finally appointed their first ever rat czar to
Now
control
imagine that on your business card, Brian. You get what I'm
coolest
saying? That's in your
title
title.
ever. I think
Exactly.
I don't know much about it. I got to read into this person, but like, I mean, imagine like, hey, I'm the rat czar of New York
Exactly.
City. I bet you have more pull than most. There's leaders of nation states that have less assets available to
Right.
them than the rat
They'll
czar of New
hold the
York City
door
does.
open when you're going to the trattoria, the pizzeria for you, and somebody will go, "Why'd you hold the door?" It's a fucking rat
That's
czar,
a
man.
rat czar. I mean,
Don't you know who that is? That's great. I love that. There's going
yeah,
to be, by the way, there's going to be a reckoning there too, because that's going to turn into a mini series.
I hope
rat
so.
czar,
I
and they're
hope
going to
there's
have.
a documentary being filmed about it, right?
How
That,
can you look? Oh my gosh, I didn't want to get into the West Coast thinking on that one,
yeah,
and I'm all for everybody. And I don't want anybody to be in pain or hurting. But
right,
doesn't that
right.
go right back to what we were talking about? You can
It,
get an answer out of somebody by using torture,
yep.
but it's only the answer
Not
that they're going to
it's
give you. It ain't the right answer. That's confirmation bias.
it's
That's a
just
great example.
torture is just like Chat GPT. It's trying to give you the answer that it thinks you want.
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
not the right one. It's so
And it's warm and it feels convenient and the words are in some kind of order. And guess
yeah,
what we do? All of a
right.
sudden we feel stability and there's a sense of security in that. And then 10 years from now, we're going to look back and go, what were we thinking? You
Yeah.
know it.
Yeah. No, that's the ultimate way to look at it. I think right there is,
Yeah,
if someone were looking back on this 10 years from now, or what do you want to be remembered by this? If you
exactly.
fast forward this 10 years and go, where does this be? And we talk about time all the time on this. And I love even when we had Dr. Leah DeBello on here, who was great,
Love
and
her.
she brought up time is a function of language, and that was another one I wrote down.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, we don't, our brain is not good at categorizing things or perceiving time very well. So
Nope.
I think that's that and fear is myopic. I like that
Yeah.
one, Greg.
Well, and I tell you what, every once in a while you see something that just changes your outlook on a day. So we're in a small community in the middle of nowhere, and there's a great distance between all the homes. A couple of dogs went missing a couple of days ago. And what does the community do? They pull
Yeah,
together, they locate the dogs, and everybody yesterday was out cheering for the dogs as they came back out of the wilderness, and people were crying and patting each other on the back, and it brought the community together. Look, you can have that power with a culture, or you can turn it
yeah,
into hate, death, and fear in just by using words, or by saying nothing, or by jumping into a protest and further alienating the people rather than having a pancake breakfast and bringing them together. And
no,
Brian,
I
I
agree.
truly believe that. Truly.
Yeah. Plus, I love pancakes too. Who doesn't?
That's
Well,
so
someone will
funny.
come.
You've never taken me to
Someone
breakfast.
will.
We're
Someone
always
will
in the gym
complain.
at breakfast, and then I have to wait all day long and eat nothing but a Larabar and a Fig Newton or something. It's horrible. Not a Fig Newton. That sounds good though.
No,
I think
no.
I'm going to stop and eat now.
Yeah, yeah. That's probably a good spot
I
to end
talked
on.
myself
Although
into being hungry.
that the problem too is the outrage culture. If you can say, "Hey, we're having a free
Yep,
pancake breakfast," and someone will come up and goes, "What do you have a problem with waffles? You don't like?"
exactly. And what do you mean by free? There's strings attached somewhere. Yeah,
so
kiss my ass. That's a good
so
answer.
that's good. Well, I know we got into a lot. I started with understanding what we mean by culture as context and bring that into perception versus reality, and how those go hand in hand,
Yeah,
and how things come down to fear and decision making. So, there. hopefully there's some takeaways in there. Got to be a lesson in there somewhere.
It was the right amount of time that we talked.
Yeah, I don't know.
Don't worry about the content anymore.
At this
it's
point,
just a time
I'm just
thing.
going, shit, I got like 6 things I got to get done today, so maybe we should wrap this.
Exactly. And I wanted you to protect Friday, and you jammed a bunch of shit into Friday, so now I don't have a day off.
I know. I apologize, but there's only so many days in the week and so many hours in a day, and that was not my design.
Time is just a function of language.
It is. It is. Well, you know, I want to remind everyone, we have the Patreon side where we go into details about some of the stuff or give a little bit more that we want to at least just have behind a paywall a little bit, just to keep some of the riffraff out. And then, you know, check out the Left of Greg podcast website.
Yes, please.
Just go to leftofgreg.com. You can sign up there, stay informed about different stuff that we have going on, and check out the Arcadia Cognerati one as well. Follow us on social media. We've got a lot coming this year, a lot even this summer. So stay informed, because those folks who are in the club and sign up and do all that stuff obviously get first dibs and get all the discount stuff when we start doing all this, and we get to use as a sounding board for future things that we do. So some of the things that we do behind the scenes will enlist the aid of others, as we recommend other people doing. And so that's this community here who listens to this podcast being enlisting your aid, where you can get maybe some cool free training or something like that out of it, and we get some feedback for what we maybe are potentially building on another project.
And you become the rat czar. In that moment, you become the rat czar for Arcadia Cognerati. The birder of rats, the piper of pied.
So we've had those different job descriptions, you know what I mean? Where, like, you know, Puppet Master was who runs the range on different stuff, and different Minion and Trunk Monkey or Prank Monkey. I mean,
Death Sled Driver.
Yeah, Death Sled. Rat Czar is a whole new one. Rat Czar is like, but that sounds really important. I think that might be above my title. I don't know.
Well, senior rat czar would be above your title.
If we ever have to bring in an outside CEO, I think that would be their title. Rat czar.
Love it.
Okay.
Well, folks, tell us what you think, though.
Yeah. Let us know what you think. leftofgreg@gmail.com. We appreciate everyone listening, and thank you for those of you who've been sharing it with your friends, because we've been a bump in listens and everything. And so we welcome all of our new listeners. Please, we do appreciate it when you share an episode with a friend. That's the best way to kind of grow this and get more people into it. Say, hey, here's what I listened to. Here's why I liked it. We should also include these kind of comments more at the beginning of the episode too, when people are still listening, but we got to remember to do that. So
are we still on?
I think so.
Exactly.
But we thank everyone for tuning in. We do appreciate it, and we appreciate your support, and thank you for listening. And don't forget that training changes behavior.